Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. It gives me great pleasure and it's a great honor to welcome Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez back to the show. We invited him to the show back in June as we discussed his books, One Man Alone, An Investigation of Nutrition, Cancer, and William Donald Kelley, and The Trophoblast and the Origins of Cancer, about his work with pancreatic enzymes and his many, many years of investigating nutritional approaches to cancer and other degenerative diseases. He's been in practice in New York since 1987 with Dr. Linda Isaacs. In his office, he uses individualized aggressive nutritional protocols to work with many types of cancer, with other illnesses such as allergies, autoimmune disorders, and chronic fatigue. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to pay very close attention. I also want you to go back and listen to our first interview. Welcome, Dr. Nick Gonzalez, back to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning and good afternoon in New York.
Great to be with you, and thanks so much for the compliments, and thanks for having me back on. I always like to talk about what we're doing.
When we spoke back in June of this year, I did ask you about Steve Jobs. You shared a little bit about how Steve Jobs knew about you, and you talked about some of his predilection mentally, what happens in the medical community when a celebrity gets ill. I want you to restate some of that, and I also want you to talk about some of the details that the public does not know about the fact that he had treatment that is not consistent with curing cancer, like his liver transplant.
Yeah, happy to do all that. Celebrities are always in danger. They don't realize that. Their money, their fame, their notoriety puts them in danger. How so? Because esteemed conventional doctors at major institutions are almost like predators with celebrity patients. So, for example, Michael Landon, who did consult with me once for half an hour and I never heard from him again, was really sucked into mainstream very quickly and got an experimental chemo protocol. He was dead within 3 months. I have pancreatic cancer patients with liver metastases who've been with me 15 years. He was gone in 3 months. And after he died, his widow, his estate was estimated at $360 million, a very successful Hollywood actor. His wife, I know through his publicist, who remains to this day, Harry Flynn, a good friend of mine, gave the doctor in Cedars-Sinai $38 million. And he was dead within 3 months, but still was rewarded. The celebrities just think that the best of the best, the smartest of the smartest, are at these major institutions like Cedars-Sinai or Sloan Kettering or Stanford, which is where Jobs was treated, and that these are these remarkable, like Aerosmith from the Sinclair Lewis novel, these dedicated scientists working late into the night trying to cure their cancer, and they actually buy into that. And Steve Jobs was no different. Now, Mr. Jobs, who obviously a very smart man, a guy's multi-billionaire, and made inventions that we all use and love and hold dear to our hearts. He did think outside the box, and he did do alternatives, not my therapy. We did talk once. He never was my patient. His acupuncturist wanted him to come see me, but he never did. We spoke at length. He was very gracious. Never heard from him again. But I know he was doing some alternatives. I think he did macrobiotics. That's what I've heard. I know that Dean Ornish was a good friend of his, and Ornish is big into the low-fat vegetarian type thing. I know he did some of that. But ultimately, he went the conventional route and had Whipple. Now, one of the things that I read constantly, in fact, I heard there was a panel on the Fox channel, where they were talking about how crazy it was that he went and did alternatives. I just don't understand that. It's almost like this irrationality that somehow the Orthodox physicians have all the answers. If they had all the answers, the 5-year survival rate in their world for pancreatic cancer wouldn't be 2% or 3%. It would be 99%. But somehow, even though they fail the great majority of times with patients with pancreatic cancer, they're still considered the knowledgeable experts. To me, an expert is someone who knows how to do something right. If you have a car and it breaks down, you bring it to your mechanic, and if the mechanic said, well, I only can get 2% of these cars turned around, you get your car out of there so fast. But somehow with medicine, it's different. If you go to Stanford or Sloan Kettering or Johns Hopkins and they say, well, we can only help about 2 to 3% of people with your disease, it's like they roll over and bow down and say, wow, I'm so glad to be in the hands of the expert. And that's where I've used the phrase that it's not rational, it's almost like a religious phenomena where it has nothing to do with science or data or objective evaluation of the facts, but rather this almost fanatical religious belief that people at powerful institutions must have the answer, even when they clearly, obviously don't. Now, Steve Jobs did have what's considered the less aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. two basic forms of form that involves the production of pancreatic enzymes. 95% of pancreatic cancers involve the enzyme-producing cells, and that's the really deadly form where the average survival is 3 to 6 months even today. Not in my office, but in the conventional world, that's what it is. He had the islet cell cancer, which affects the endocrine-secreting cells of the pancreas. The pancreas has two kinds of cells, those that produce the enzymes that help with digestion and those that produce the hormones like insulin. And the ones that occur in the hormone-producing cells, the islet cells, tend to be less aggressive. Now, it's all relative. In the Sloan Kettering series, the average survival for islet cell cancer was about 3 to 4 years, which is certainly far better than with the exocrine or the enzyme-producing type cancer. But it's still not some kind of simple cakewalk where 20 years later most people are alive. I mean, within 4 years, 50% are dead. Jobs lived 7 years, and people are criticizing him for doing some alternative stuff. Now, I don't know what he did, so I can't vouch for it, but how do we know that the alternatives didn't give him 7 years of life, and had he not done that, he would have been dead in 4 years, which is the average statistical, scientific, objective, rational data.
I saw an interview with Walter Isaacson, who wrote the last book about Steve Jobs that just came out this week, in an interview on television. And one of the things he said, which I thought was so interesting, was basically that Jobs had this opportunity when he was first diagnosed to take the traditional route and let them get the cancer out of there through traditional means, but that he delayed his treatment 9 months, and as a result, it metastasized. I thought it was a very interesting statement because nobody gave the details of what exactly he did, how far along it was, like that. So we know that chemotherapy and radiation has not been very successful for most people. What do you have to say about that, and what did he actually do, and why did he have a liver transplant?
The sequence of events as I put together and from what he told me is that he was diagnosed with what appeared to be local pancreatic cancer. But, having dealt with pancreatic cancer and studied it for 30 years and treated it for 24 years, the world is filled with the earth is filled with patients with pancreatic cancer who told it was localized and underwent the Whipple procedure and had it out and then were dead 6 months later. We get those calls every day from patients who had the Whipple, that's a very aggressive treatment where they take out 50 to 70% of the pancreas, part of the stomach, part of the small intestine. They reconnect all the anatomy. It's a very aggressive procedure. When it was developed back in the 30s and 40s, the mortality rate during surgery, 30 to 40, 50% of people would die during surgery, but they had no treatment for pancreatic cancer, so they were willing to risk it. And it's only done for localized disease. So if Isaacson said that would be a misstatement, because when he did have the surgery some 8 or 9 months later, it was still localized, and they gave him the first thing that happened is he had a Whipple procedure. So while he was doing his alternatives, whatever they may have done, apparently the tumor did progress, but it was still considered local. And then he underwent the Whipple procedure, which is only done for pancreatic cancer if it's limited to the pancreas. At some time later, it clearly recurred in his liver, and then that's when he went to Memphis and had a liver transplant, which, I don't know, $250,000, $500,000 those things can cost, which is just a completely experimental type treatment, and it's not something that they do it for primary liver cancer, and in that case it can be curative, but not with metastatic pancreatic cancer. It's never curative for that, because if it's spread into the liver, you assume it's going to spread somewhere else, even if you can't see it on the scans.
Then why would they do it?
Why would the doctors do it?
Yeah, why would they experiment on somebody?
Well, he could pay the bill first, and I'm sure that there was a rationalization that this is the only thing that could help him. But
do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with it at all. I think first of all, when you do a liver transplant, then you have to be on immunosuppressive drugs, which have been shown to stimulate cancer growth. You're suppressing the immune system. So the last thing a cancer patient like him would need. In fact, for all the criticism, I hear this over and over. Every time I turn on TV or listen on the internet or listen to the radio and talk about Jobs, if he had done surgery right away, he'd have been cured. Who knows that? I mean, who suddenly? Journalists are godlike, and they know what would have happened had he. How do you know that he wouldn't have died on the table? Where's the scientific evidence that had he done it then, he wouldn't have done worse? How do we know that the fact he did alternatives while it didn't cure him may have helped him, may have made him stronger so he could withstand the surgery better? And had he done it right away, that's such a debilitating procedure. Even today, 10 to 15% of patients die on the table during the procedure. I had a patient's family call me recently in tears, not my patient. He was interested in becoming my patient, went off and got a Whipple and died on the table here at a major New York cancer center, which will remain unnamed. True story. So how do we know that the alternatives that he didn't so strengthen his body that when he finally did have the Whipple, that he was able to survive nicely, and maybe that helped him. Maybe that's why he